The day my stepbrother said the baby was his, I was 20 years old and standing in the living room where my parents decided to erase me from their lives. He did not shout. He did not cry. He sat there calmly, letting the lie breathe, while my mother's face drained of color and my father looked at me like I was something broken they needed to throw away quickly. I remember the sound of my husband's keys hitting the table later that night, the way he would not look at me when he told me to leave. I remember the cold air outside the house, my suitcase too light for a life that had just ended. That was how I vanished. No explanations. No chance to speak. Just silence forced on me. 10 years later, I sat across from them in a courtroom, listening as the truth finally surfaced. Their voices shook. Mine did not. What they saw as forgiveness was never on the table. What I had prepared was quieter, slower, and far more final. I am Layla. At 20, I was naive enough to trust the people I called family. My father was a man who measured love in what I could accomplish for him, never in what I needed. My mother, quiet and dutiful, followed his lead, rarely seeing the woman I was becoming. My stepbrother, Amir, had always worn a charming mask, smiling when it suited him, twisting words when it did not. And my husband, the man I thought would protect me, proved how little he understood me when the world turned against me. From childhood, I had been the one who picked up the pieces. Broken toys, arguments, school projects forgotten by others, they all landed in my hands. I learned to act strong because no one else would, to anticipate problems before they became disasters, to absorb responsibility like it was my inheritance. People relied on me quietly, without acknowledgement, as though my presence was a permanent fixture meant only to serve them. I remember sitting at the dinner table the night Amir made his claim, watching the flicker of doubt in my parents' eyes, the way they leaned into his words as though my existence could be rewritten with a single accusation. And I thought, how easily they traded me for convenience, for the comfort of believing a lie. I have thought about that night every year since, how my voice could not break the air, how my husband's hands on my shoulders were not a shield but a push into oblivion. And yet, all that practice at seeing what others could not, anticipating, calculating, enduring, was not wasted. It was quietly building a map I would follow a decade later. Every betrayal I endured became a piece of preparation, a step in the silent strategy that no one had seen coming. For 10 years, I lived with the echo of their disbelief ringing in my ears. Every phone call I ignored, every message left unanswered, was a reminder of how easily they had discarded me. Amir, in particular, delighted in subtle digs whenever our paths crossed in court or in the rare family gatherings I attended for appearances. A raised eyebrow, a smirk disguised as concern, the faint pause before he spoke my name, all calibrated to make me question my own worth. I remember one Christmas, standing quietly in the kitchen while my mother praised Amir for some minor success. "You're so reliable," she said, her eyes flicking toward me, expecting I would nod, smile, and silently absorb the compliment meant for him. It was never about generosity, it was about reminding me of my place, the invisible one. Even strangers seemed to reinforce it. At work, colleagues would comment on my quiet demeanor, assuming weakness, never seeing the meticulous care I poured into every detail of my life. I noticed glances, the soft chuckle when someone whispered a story of my family's misjudgments, the way my parents relished telling acquaintances that I took things too seriously. Every slight, every withheld apology, every half-hearted attempt at recognition built a reservoir of quiet fury within me. I started mapping it out, not with malice but with clarity. Each disrespect, each betrayal became a reference point. The pauses in Amir's voice, the way my parents' eyes darted when confronted, these were markers, clues for the day the balance would tip. I did not need to shout. I only needed to wait, to plan, and to let the consequences unfold with precision. And slowly the audience, watching from every line I spoke, would feel the weight of the tension, the simmering storm that no one saw coming. The realization came quietly, almost imperceptibly, one gray morning as I sifted through old court files. I had spent years cataloging every injustice, every betrayal, every small lie that had been used to diminish me. Normally, I observed with a detached precision, letting the world reveal itself without my interference. But that day, as I reread Amir's false statements and my parents' blind acceptance, a cold clarity settled over me. Enough was enough. It was not a lightning bolt of anger. It was a meticulous recognition that I had been carrying their decisions like stones in my pockets, and I was done carrying them. I closed the folder and looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was calm, deliberate, prepared. This was the woman who would not be silenced, manipulated, or erased. I drafted the plan slowly, carefully, as though each word was a stone laid in the foundation of what was coming. The courthouse became my stage, but I would not perform. I would reveal the truth, let it speak for itself, and let justice, not theatrics, deliver the impact. I imagined the moment Amir would read the documents, the pause as recognition struck him. I pictured my parents' faces, pale and uncertain, as the story they had believed unraveled in real time. And when the day came, it was neither dramatic nor loud. There was no shouting, no imploring. I presented the evidence, each piece undeniable, each fact meticulously traced. I watched as the weight of truth settled, slow and inevitable, across the room. Their whispers, their stares, the way they tried to protest, but could not, was more satisfying than any angry outburst could have been. In that quiet, controlled courtroom, the years of injustice began to bend, not with vengeance but with precision. I did not need to raise my voice to be heard, I needed only to be ready. I did not rush the process. Revenge rushed is usually exposed, and I had learned the cost of exposure early. I spent years rebuilding my life quietly, earning qualifications that no one from my past bothered to ask about. I studied business law while working nights, learned how contracts breathe and how evidence survives scrutiny. I did not become a lawyer, but I learned how lawyers think, how judges listen, how truth must be structured to be believed. Every document was gathered legally. Medical records. Financial transfers. Old messages Amir thought were erased. I requested files the right way, waited through delays, followed procedures that reward patience. I kept my tone neutral in every email, polite in every meeting. People underestimate calm women. They talk more. They leave trails. I hired professionals when necessary, not to attack but to verify. A forensic accountant confirmed inconsistencies Amir could not explain. A handwriting analyst validated statements that had been altered. I did not twist facts. I aligned them. I let reality do the heavy work. Socially, I remained invisible. No dramatic posts. No emotional confrontations. Silence has a way of making others careless. While my parents told themselves I had moved on, I was preparing a record so clean it could not be dismissed as bitterness. I rehearsed nothing aloud. I did not imagine speeches. I focused on sequence, what must be shown first, what must come last, what could not be argued once placed on the table. My goal was not humiliation. It was accountability. By the time the filing was complete, the case no longer belonged to me emotionally. It belonged to the system. That was the point. Smart revenge does not scream. It documents, submits, waits, and lets consequences arrive exactly on time. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in atmosphere. Sound carried differently there. Papers whispered. Shoes echoed. When I took my seat, no one recognized me at first. 10 years had softened their certainty, not my resolve. I spoke only when asked. My voice was even, unhurried. Each document was submitted in sequence, not as an attack, but as a correction. Amir's earlier statements appeared on the screen beside the verified records. The gap between them was impossible to ignore. I watched his confidence fracture in small ways, the tightening of his jaw, the way his foot stopped moving, the moment he realized the lie had outlived its usefulness. My parents sat behind him. I did not turn around, but I felt them. The shift in the room was subtle but undeniable. Questions that once dismissed me now circled back to them. Why had no one verified the claim? Why had they acted so quickly? Silence answered where excuses failed. When the medical report confirmed what I had known all along, there was no gasp, no dramatic reaction. Just a pause. A long one. The kind that lets truth settle fully before moving on. The judge did not look at me with pity. He looked at the file, then at Amir, and asked a question that changed everything. Consequences arrived without my assistance. Legal penalties followed procedural lines. Reputations adjusted themselves. I did not smile. I did not look relieved. I simply listened as the narrative corrected itself, detail by detail. As the session ended, I gathered my papers with steady hands. What I felt was not triumph but completion. The lie that had erased me was now documented as exactly what it was. And that was enough. The fallout was quieter than anyone expected, yet it rippled through every corner of my former life. Amir avoided eye contact whenever our paths crossed, his arrogance replaced by the awkwardness of exposure. Colleagues who once praised him in passing now offered cautious nods to me, unsure how much I had anticipated. Silence, it seemed, carried a weight far heavier than anger. My parents called a few times, their voices soft, hesitant, almost as if testing whether I would respond. I listened, said polite words, and then returned to my own life. The sense of obligation that had shadowed me for years evaporated. Their disappointment was not mine to bear. I realized that self-worth is not granted by family approval, it is claimed by living truthfully and acting when justice aligns with reason. Friends reached out afterward, expressing a mixture of awe and relief. They had known the injustice I endured, but had never seen it confronted so decisively. Their reactions reminded me that boundaries protect not just ourselves, but those around us. I had demonstrated that silent, precise action could dismantle years of false narratives without theatrics or cruelty. Even Amir's social circle adjusted subtly. Invitations stopped arriving. Casual greetings became stiff and brief. Reputation, once a nebulous currency, had shifted on its own terms. And me? I felt lighter. Not vindictive, not triumphant, simply correct. The truth had been restored, and with it, my right to live unburdened by lies. For anyone watching, listening, or reading this, the lesson matters. You do not need fury to correct injustice. Calm, deliberate action, rooted in facts and integrity, is often the most devastating and the most satisfying form of revenge. Injustice may strike, but it does not have to define you. I walked out of the courthouse without a glance backward. The weight I had carried for 10 years, the shame, the disbelief, the endless questions, was no longer mine to hold. I felt lighter, not because I had humiliated anyone, but because I had finally stood in the truth. My life, once dictated by the lies of others, was reclaimed quietly, deliberately, entirely. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes around me. Colleagues treated me with a new respect, not born of fear but of acknowledgement. Friends no longer hesitated to include me, and I no longer hesitated to say no. Even my parents' calls, once demanding and laden with guilt, became manageable, neutral, almost polite. I realized that boundaries, once established, protect not just your time but your dignity. I began planning the next chapters of my life without looking for permission. My career advanced steadily. I took on projects that challenged me, not because someone expected it but because I wanted it. Relationships, romantic, friendly, professional, were now chosen, not inherited. And each time I reflected on the past, I felt not anger but clarity. The lesson I carry forward is simple but profound. Revenge is not about spectacle or vindictiveness. It is about restoring balance, asserting truth, and protecting yourself with intelligence and calm resolve. The world cannot erase your story if you claim it fully. 10 years of silence and careful action led to a single undeniable fact: I survived. I endured. And I won, not over anyone else, but over the fear and doubt that once held me hostage. I finally understand. The greatest revenge is living a life so unapologetically yours that no lie, betrayal, or falsehood can touch it.